Welcome back to another episode in a series covering the story of Western philosophy. In this series, I have attempted to paint for you an image of the different philosophers of our intellectual tradition wrestling with reality, trying to make sense of everything, great warriors in the Colosseum of ideas. But what if I told you throughout history there's been a more subtle influence fighting for the soul of Western civilization, a different side to the story of philosophy? One filled with mystery cults, psychedelic drugs, alchemy, magic, secret societies, and astrology girls. The esoteric tradition. Now, in trying to teach you about Western philosophy, I've had to distinguish mysticism and religion from philosophy, but that limitation has the potential to leave out context. We have entered the era of Christianity, and so I've thought to myself, why exactly should I validate Plato's God and world of ideas, but ignore Christianity and the ideas within it, when both were massively influential in shaping our history and our modern culture today? Both, if we were to take a secular approach, were humanity's attempts to make sense of reality. And it is clear if you study the esoteric tradition that Christianity was at least in part a convergence of pre-existing stories, symbols, and philosophies. Wisdom refined through long oral traditions. It's not complete nonsense. So do I do a video on Christianity? Or am I to treat Christianity as the bane of philosophical creativity, a period of cultural desolation? I certainly don't view it that way. But if I do a video covering Christianity, should I then cover Egyptian, Babylonian, and Greek mythology? Should I cover the mystery cults across the world? Should I cover the impact of Hermetic philosophy on later philosophers in our culture today? With modern comments by my cousin Jeffrey about how my vibes are off, or how he suggests that I should try manifesting and then maybe my life wouldn't suck. Why don't you manifest your hairline back, Jeffrey, you stupid balding whore? Do I cover alchemy? That was an interesting phase in our development, but it isn't traditional philosophy. Should I at least include them to establish the setting in which these characters existed? I think it's an error that so many of the commentators I've read ignore these subjects. I understand why they do, but they're important ideas. And I want to bring the entire story of Western thought, of Western philosophy to life, not just the characters. So screw it. I will teach you guys about magic and mystery cults. I will train you to be wizards, philosophers, and cultists. Knowledge is a weapon, and I will make sure that you are armed with the best. So let us dive into this aspect of our story by discussing the mysterious cult that massively influenced Greek and Roman philosophy, the Eleusinian mysteries. But first, let us rewind our story a little bit, back to Pythagoras. I did a video about Pythagoras in which I think I did a good job embracing the mysticism and mythologization, pointing out its significance. But this time, let's dive into the mythologization and mysticism even deeper. One story goes, while the father of Pythagoras was in the city of Delphi on matters pertaining to his business as a merchant, he and his wife decided to consult the oracle of Delphi as to whether or not the fates were favorable on their return voyage to Syria. Pause. The oracle of Delphi is something I keep mentioning in these videos, but this is a perfect example of missing context. What exactly is it? It was said that the spot of the Oracle of Delphi was founded on a fissure in the earth that released fumes that induced visions. The place was sacred, belonging to Gaia, protected by her giant serpent child named Python. But Apollo slayed Python and founded his oracle there. The priestesses of Apollo operated there and were sometimes called Pythonesses. People would consult the oracle for all manner of issues, small and great. During times of political crisis, city-states would send people to consult the oracle and heed the advice. This was a massively important cultural phenomenon. Anyway, back to the story. Pythagoras' father asked his question, but the priestess did not answer the question that he asked. Instead, she told Pythagoras' father that his wife was then with child and would give birth to a son who was destined to surpass all men in beauty and wisdom, and who throughout the course of his life would contribute much to the benefit of mankind. Pythagoras' father was so deeply impressed by the prophecy that when his child was born, he named the child Pythagoras, for they believed that he had been predestined by the oracle. Pythagoras would grow up to pursue the wisdom of the world, but he existed in an enchanted world where people still believed in gods and spirits, so many of the wisest the world had to offer were steeped in esotericism. He explored and was influenced by Dionysian worship, Orphism, and was likely initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. We discussed in our video on Pythagoras the massive influence of the Dionysian mysteries and Orphism on his thought and mythologized identity. If you want to hear more about that, you can go watch that video. From there, Pythagoras traveled the world in search of wisdom. You see, there were mysterious esoteric traditions across the world that he desired to learn from. He spent a long time in Egypt, learning from the Egyptians, an estimated 22 years according to some. The nature of his travels from there are of course heavily debated, but it is clear he traveled many places and learned from many people. Now, we treat the Western intellectual tradition like it begins with Greece, but it's more like a surviving written intellectual tradition that credits specific characters begins with Greece. Much of early Greek wisdom and culture was influenced by other civilizations. For example, many of the mathematical discoveries credited to the Greeks were likely Egyptian in origin. So Pythagoras traveled the world, and all of these mysteries and traditions shaped his philosophy when he returned to Greece, where he started his cult and began teaching his philosophical views. What this means is that his philosophy gives us unique insight into the potential wisdom of the countless mystery cults that existed in the ancient world. Now fast forward to Plato. Plato too becomes the famous initiate of the Eleusinian mystery cult, and this experience changes his life. So what were the Eleusinian mysteries? What was this cult that through these two thinkers alone helped shape and define the Western world? The Eleusinian mysteries were an annual event, a festival that would last 10 days. In the first days of the festival, the initiates would bathe to purify themselves, and rituals of animal sacrifice were performed by priests. On the fourth day, the festival procession would walk from Athens to Eleusis. When they got to Eleusis, they would fast for a day. The initiates would then break their fast with the kykeon, a barley beer that many speculate contained a psychedelic substance. The priests would then lead the initiates through rituals and through some means induce altered states of consciousness, even if it wasn't the beer. This, of course, is a mystery cult. Those who participated were sworn to secrecy, forbidden by Athenian law on penalty of death from revealing the secrets of the mysteries, so it can be difficult to get a clear idea of what exactly happened. What we know for certain is that what they experienced had a lasting impact on their lives. There was a single experience that often radically changed their worldview. This experience was available to old and young, male and female, slave and free. And the roots of the Eleusinian mysteries were ancient. They stem back to the Neolithic age. The cult worshipped the goddess of agriculture, Demeter, and her daughter Persephone. The story of Persephone, if you don't remember, is about how Hades kidnaps Persephone, whisking her away into the underworld to be his bride. When Demeter couldn't find her daughter, in despair, she stopped everything on earth from growing. Inevitably, humans began to die of starvation and were unable to produce burnt offerings to the gods. And the gods really liked the smell of burnt food. Not smelling burnt food really upsets Zeus, so Zeus commands Hades to let Persephone go. But Hades tricks Persephone, forcing her to spend a few months of the year in Hades. This is the cause of the seasons. When Persephone is in Hades, we get winter, and when she returns, we get spring. What matters most about these myths, in my opinion, are the themes of death and rebirth, descent to the underworld and return, and separation and reunion. In the initiations, there were things done, things shown, and things said. On some level, these themes were likely relevant. As I said, there's increasing support for the belief that the ritual involved the consumption of a psychedelic beverage. This likely fed into those same themes, when in the extreme, the experience inducing a feeling of ego death, and then a return. The experience would have been a very dramatic descent and return, a death and a resurrection, a reunion, and then a separation. In addition to this consumption, there must have been some type of teaching that was very symbolic in nature. Again, those who participated in the Eleusinian mysteries were sworn to secrecy. The wisdom they had intentionally wasn't supposed to be written down, so when the chain of oral tradition was broken, the truth was partially lost, or at least it's difficult to find a clear, correct, authoritative answer. However, we have hints. Plato was criticized widely because it was believed that his philosophic work divulged too much of the Eleusinian wisdom. Earlier in the series, I said Plato ripped off or was largely influenced by Pythagoras. I still agree with this, but I do think it can be said that the Eleusinian mystery cult likely influenced both Pythagoras and Plato. It is clear from their philosophies that the Eleusinian cult taught some sort of idealism. The material world understood through the senses and reason is not everything that there is. These things are but shadows on a cave wall. There is more to reality, something like a higher world or worlds. This likely stems from both the philosophies taught and the psychedelic experience. The psychedelic experience being interpreted as a way to expand awareness beyond the limitations of immediate sensory experience. The idea of a monotheistic God among philosophers understood more as a metaphysical explanation rather than a personified authoritative being is also likely influenced by these esoteric traditions. Pythagoras divided the universe into three parts, which he called the supreme world, the superior world, and the inferior world. The highest or supreme world was the spiritual essence that pervades all things, the realm or plane of God. God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent because God is everything. His awareness allows everything to exist. Both of the lower worlds exist within the nature of this supreme sphere. The superior world is the home of the immortals. It is also the dwelling place of archetypes. The third or inferior world was the material world. It is a commonly reported psychedelic experience to feel as if your ego dissolves, and suddenly you're in the presence of God, or this universal consciousness that pervades all things, and you feel an interconnectedness with everything. It is understandable why you would come up with something like the supreme world as a way of making sense of this experience. That experience leads people to ponder on the nature of reality. Suppose you're trying to make sense of reality and you believe that your immediate experiential reality is a product of mind, or at least your awareness is structured according to the nature of mind, and that forms your experience. Yet seemingly you coexist with other minds in a more foundational reality that is beyond and independent of your mind. What could possibly sustain that reality? Well, if my reality is supported by my mind, it is a product of my awareness, then that more foundational reality must also be supported by a mind. Whose mind? The mind of God. The universe is then God, or the mind of God, this foundational awareness that pervades all things. Again, what I'm saying here is very much speculative. What is clear is that those who were initiated experienced something that changed their worldviews dramatically and in a lasting way. Many were no longer afraid of death after their experience. Today, we give strong doses of psychedelics to terminally ill patients, and it is incredibly effective in treating death anxiety. People commonly claim to have experienced something like death and assert that it isn't that bad, and so they are no longer afraid. It also seems safe to say that this mystery cult promoted some sort of idealism. Beyond that, things become rapidly more blurry. From that life-changing experience, I believe Pythagoras and Plato constructed their own particular philosophies to make sense of it. Pythagoras with his mathematical worldview and making sense of our immediate realities and his conception of the three worlds, and Plato with his world of ideas and God. Countless other prominent Greeks and Romans were initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, including the Stoic and Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius from the previous episode. The impact of this mystery cult cannot be ignored, and this is but one mystery cult in an entire secretive intellectual tradition. There were mystery cults such as this one across the world. It wasn't even the only cult in Greece. In fact, the Dionysian cult was perhaps more impactful in the grand scheme of things, with its potential influence on Christianity. We discussed that previously in our episode on Pythagoras, so I won't cover it again. In conclusion, what is a good conclusion? Go do drugs. Thank you for watching. Bye.